Well, he's a man of many titles. I'm just going to call his name that way. Uche Ekwe is the head of international relations at the Nigeria Labour Congress, and he's our guest this morning. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to say that the report we saw there is another kettle of fish. We're going to ask you much later whether or not there's some rift between the NLC and the TUC. But this morning, what is at the top of our mind is this bill, which is now at the National Assembly. We heard it in the House of Reps, on the floor of the House of Reps, and it's past second reading. They're trying to move the minimum wage from the executive list to the concurrent, exclusive list, beg your pardon, to the concurrent list. And we're wondering, how is Labour taking that?
Yeah, we've made it clear that it is not acceptable, and it's a bill, it's an attempt actually to return us back to what we have moved ahead over 40 years ago. And one of the things clear from that is it's a mixture of two situations: desperation from certain political groups, especially some governors, some very retrogressive governors who believe that they wouldn't pay minimum wage, and a combination of a display of illiteracy, yes, and I use the word illiteracy, on understanding the meaning of a national minimum wage. You can see people raise very petty arguments of, at times you hear some people say, oh, we're in a federal state, that true federalism means states will determine their wages. Of course, states will determine their wages, but all over the world, over 90% of nations in the world have national minimum wage. National minimum, that's the floor, the basic floor level of wages which no worker should receive less. They also showed ignorance, a high one, if you say minimum wage, because that's the target. The argument in the bill is that if you move it to concurrent, states can now determine their minimum wage. But what the people did not avert their mind to, if states determine the minimum wage of state workers and the federal determine the minimum wage of federal workers, who determines the minimum wage of the shop floor worker in Channels Television? Who determines the minimum wage of the shop level worker in these day newspapers? Who determines the minimum wage of the shop floor worker in the chemical industry and all other private industry, the construction companies? Nations have averted themselves knowing that even the private organization is where all sorts of practices that is anti the people comes up. That is why the ILO foresaw this a long time ago and now made a provision that nation states should have a minimum shop floor which the wage level will go. And usually our politicians will want to flaunt true federalism, and happily they usually use the United States as an example. But when it comes to this matter, they won't borrow to know that the United States have a national minimum wage which before now is $10. And Biden, the new president, is pushing $15 national minimum wage. But even while it's 10, some states in the United States are paying more than 10. So nothing stops a state in Nigeria to pay more than 30,000 or whatever is fixed as a national minimum.
But, you know, you said that this is taking us back 40 years. Over and over again, we see this contention coming up. There've always been attempts to move this from the exclusive list, legislative, to the concurrent list. And oftentimes it's the same argument that a lot of states cannot even pay what has been described as the national minimum wage. Some will argue maybe because of the strong arm tactics, which is used to get the minimum wage at the end of the day. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't know how the weak can use strong arm tactics against the strong. The weak in this circumstance is the vulnerable working people of Nigeria. To arrive at every minimum wage, there's always a tripartite negotiation that takes place, sometimes running for 2 years before a minimum wage is agreed on. And this meeting have representatives of government, represented by federal government, and in the case of Nigeria, the governors usually nominate 6 governors. Then the private sector nominates members, NECA, Manufacturers Association, and the labor movement now between the NLC and TUC nominate its own members. And after negotiation, that puts everything on the table, agrees to a minimum wage. When you talk about the arguments of states being able to pay, it looks so interesting and cheap. The whole states in the federation takes the political office holder remuneration from the fixing of Mobilization and Fiscal Commission.
RAMFAC.
Yes. Now, all the councillors across the states, state assembly members, even commissioners, political appointees, use a national benchmark to pay. But when it comes to the worker salary, people raise these arguments. And now, even when you go to ability to pay, I usually use these 2 examples. First, it is a choice of payment. It's the choice. Today, and we proudly use that example, Jigawa State in Federation account allocation is one of the lowest. In internal generated revenue, it's one of the lowest. But as I'm talking with you, Jigawa State is not owing pensioners, it's not owing salaries, it's paying minimum wage. And some states, we know how much they receive from FARC allocation monthly and have a heavy capacity in internal revenue generation, are owing minimum wage and actually leading the fight to remove the minimum wage.
Well, some people will say that the circumstances around Jigawa State might be peculiar. First and foremost, they're a relatively new state. Maybe they do not have a huge workforce.
No, they have.
Some states
no, they have
a huge burden of
no, they have.
workforce.
They have. We know the figures. They have. And some of the governors who want minimum wage scrapped have about 1,500 personal assistants who are some on 50,000, 150,000, 100,000 monthly payment. And we all know some of them, the amount they spend monthly in using private charter jets to come to Abuja for a meeting.
In other words, they would rather pay their political hangers-on than...
Who have no single job or contribution to the state economy. They are so cheap that they can't even get a practical job, be it in agriculture, and put these citizens and pay them salaries based on production. But they use them as political thugs, used during elections, but they keep them on salary as long as they stay in office, pay them so much. We all know how much some of these governors spend on security vote. But you know the interesting thing. These people pursue what should be a national focus for national development as if their lifetime would be governors. We have seen so many who fought these things, having finished their offices, now want to support that minimum wage should remain there. I don't know what blinds some people in political position that they reason just because the immediate money they want to amass, because that's the whole target, to free more funds, to have more personal money for themselves.
Do you think so? Because you have...
I know so.
And not about that question. I'm wondering, because you have cited examples of some other countries abroad. Do you think that labor shoots itself in the foot when it doesn't also prescribe an hourly minimum wage?
No, it's not about shooting ourselves on the leg. It's about being realistic about our development stage. We are realistic. We know where we are developmentally. We know when those countries move to those levels. We have all this. It's a historical fact.
Where are we? Why do you think that, you know, that's going to...
Where we are realistically is that we still have an economy that is still very weak. We still have governors who reason that there shouldn't be minimum wage at all, and who go to argue that there shouldn't be minimum wage at all, a national minimum wage. That's where we are.
No, but some people have also argued that that would increase our productivity, and that would also that would also increase the earning capacity of workers who, especially at that minimum level where they can get more than one job, to be as is done elsewhere, you know, to be able to make ends meet.
I agree with you whole and entire, but in the negotiating table, that is why we go to negotiate. For example, when we went to those negotiations, if you go and check the original document submitted by the Nigerian Labour Congress, we showed what a national minimum wage realistically should be, taking into cognizance the exchange rate, taking into cognizance cost of living. Practically, a national minimum wage will not be anything less than 76,000 naira. But when you go to negotiation, you put all the cards on the table. These same governors came with the argument, because even the minimum wage prescription law shows that you have to consider all this ability to pay and all that. So on that, we make this huge concession. And that takes me to your first question, which you alluded that they feel we coerce them. And I say, how can the weak coerce the strong? Out of our own relative weakness, we consider, and consideration for the nation, we considered a cheap national minimum wage. As cheap as it is, these same governors who were opposed to it are still opposed to it and feel so hot that they feel that minimum wage must be removed so that they can get the state assembly, most which we know are in the pocket of the governors, that they can even approve 5,000 slave wage for the working people. And not considering what happens to Nigerians working in private organizations who will have nobody to speak for them. This shows the lack of national understanding, basic understanding of what governance means. Because the protection of its citizenry from slavery should be the primary concern of everybody in governance. The danger, this potence to even national security seems to be missing in the eyes of the sponsors of this bill.
Let's quickly flip this to Lagos now. My colleague has questions for you. Ayo.
Well, I'm just wondering, Mr. Ikwe, how this is going to play out eventually, seeing that already the positioning has been that this will not happen as far as the NLC is concerned. Perhaps there is a need for the NLC and maybe perhaps Labour in its entirety to dichotomize the governor from the government of each state. If there is a legislation, shouldn't we be considering the economy or the economic capacity of each state to pay, as opposed to, you know, lording over, so to speak, you know, the recommendation that is going on here? Have we considered the productivity or otherwise of the staff in each of these institutions? Alluding to the question Mark asked, that if people were paid as they work, it will probably work better. Perhaps that is the subject of the conversation here. What mode, what shape should the laws in each of these states take that will align with the international labor laws? What do you think of that? Aren't we lumping everything together as opposed to looking at the issues, the politician different from the governance that's supposed to happen in the states?
Well, again, I won't be tired of answering these questions. First, I said the negotiations that led to minimum wage had the governors represented. the issue of ability to pay was brought to the table. And it is after looking at the aggregate that we had the minimum. Remember, this, and I think this is where the problem is. We are talking about the minimum shop floor of what can even take the worker to go to work and return back. Bear in mind, there is a UNN stipulated basic earning that an individual can survive in a day. Calculate 30,000 naira, how much it translates to $1. But let us not even bother about the dollar. Let's use it in naira. It means that the family of a low-level worker who is on 13,000 naira minimum wage, a man and a wife and 4 children live on 1,000 naira a day to eat food, to wash their clothes, to pay their house rent. I mean, we should get this thing to basic, because we are discussing it as if we are discussing something in abstract. That these people have to eat, wash their clothes, drink water, fund their electricity bill.
Just a moment, Mr. Ekwe. The question is not about the question is not about whether or not to reduce the minimum wage. I'm pretty sure that the argument is never going to be about bringing down this minimum wage, but the proprietary or otherwise. I don't think.
Are you aware that some governors have attempted to reduce the 30,000 naira minimum wage, but was handicapped by the fact that it's a national law? So it is clear, and why nations make sure there is a national minimum shop floor is because it has been anticipated that there could be people who will be mean not to care about, and that's why nation state taking into cognizance the danger of having a workforce that is lowly, totally, completely demotivated, try to fix a national. I remember, this is a national minimum shop floor. Secondly, the wage structure of a state is determined by each state through negotiation with the workers of the state. What we are talking here is the minimum, the lowest level of workers you get, not the salary structure and wage structure of state governments.
Right. So clearly there's still a lot of issues to clean up in the labor industry, issues around productivity, equity, and this will take me back to the question Mark asked earlier. And personally, I'm not quite clear what you mean by saying that Nigeria is not at that point where we can begin to talk about hourly rates. You sounded like you were saying that we have not gotten to that point. There's still a long road ahead. Just what do you mean by that?
No, I need you to get me clear. For me, I want us to start hourly rate today and have a national minimum wage for an hourly pay. I want it to happen now, even as I'm still in the studio. But we have gone to negotiations, and the other people in the table are not ready to discuss it. And it's a tripartism. You don't impose it on anybody. And you can imagine the cheapest, which is what we have adopted, is now vehemently being opposed by some governors and some sections of the political class.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, a couple of issues we want to touch, but I think that would be quite important to always raise it, because I think it will clean up a lot of issues. It will make things a bit more transparent. People get paid as they work, such that they can also aspire to earn more. But let's quickly bounce this back to the fuel price, because just yesterday. I bought petrol for 173, and Labour has been in talks with the government since last year. And during that process, we've seen fuel price hikes about twice. And this time last year, we're buying petrol for 121 naira, thereabouts, now for 173 naira. Yes, Labour has said they will protest regarding this, this minimum wage bill. But regarding this recent fuel price hike, what is Labour going to do?
No, first, the information of last year, 121, is not correct, because for over 2 years, we moved to 141 and have had adjustments since then.
Pardon me, 141, right.
That's for that. Then, the Labour have been on negotiation with government since last year, and that one have delayed because this argument, usually it's interesting. It's just like now we are debating about national minimum wage. Even a section of the media is beginning to sound as if we are disturbing the country. It's good to always deal with history. When it was power, the privatization of the power sector, we opposed it to a point that everybody felt we are disturbing the country from moving forward, because all sorts of promises was given about what will happen once power is privatized. Now, historically, it has not happened. Now on petroleum, since the regime of IBB, the NLC have maintained a position that the only way forward is that we must refine our products locally and sell it. Even recently, we said, even if you want to discuss about deregulation, it must not be import-driven. Because clearly we have always maintained we will be going through a vicious circle. Because when you depend on import of a product, the international market indices and factors will determine the price. For example, whenever the naira devalues, automatically the price goes up, and by the time you import and pay the prices of bringing it back, demurrage, pay NIMASA, pay MPA, and pay all the duties that involves import, the price will jump up.
So just one.
So we have been consistent.
Yes,
that the only way forward
is
that we must refine our products locally, and if we don't do, we will remain on a vicious circle of an attempt to increase the price of petroleum.
So what's the way forward now?
The way forward is that we must have the courage, find the wherewithal to refine our products locally. That's the only way forward. If you don't, even if you say the landing cost is 182 today, if tomorrow, which should be our desire as a country that produces crude moves up to 120, the price will move up to 400.
Well, it's a situation that is going to be, we're definitely going to be monitoring to see just how you will follow through, with the government authorities to see how the cycle can be broken. But we have to thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Today this morning. Honorable Uche Ekwe is Head of International Relations at the Nigeria Labour Congress and also liaison officer with the National Assembly of Nigeria. We have to thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much.
We also see here some of your comments and tweets. NLC and the minimum wage. Anybody is tweeting saying, every state can pay minimum wage. State governors that dash SUV worth 10 million naira to their loyalists in the state for no good reasons. Not just one, but over 10 luxury cars in their state. Well, people are certainly watching. That's what anybody is talking about this morning.
Certainly, there are so many messages that one could take, but we really have to let it go this morning. We have to thank you all very much for watching. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful rest of your beautiful day.
And I'm Kaido Kikilu. It's always great to have you join us on the program.
And I'm Alpo Yusuf. Have a lovely day.